Mr. Fish, my brother.
So good to see you, MK.
Good to be here. Cup of tea in hand.
Yeah,
Yeah. And let's have a yarn.
I'd love that.
So keen. So welcome to the Meditation Hub.
Thank you.
And you're officially the first interviewee we've ever had on the hub. And I couldn't
I'm
think of
honored.
a better compadre to chat with and pick your brain apart, not only for my selfish interest, but also to serve the interests of our community. I know that most people that are in our community are probably already aware of you and what you do, but maybe not as well. So I first met you when on a panel about yoga with our friend Karina,
Yeah.
and we were there to talk about a variety of things. But I thought this dude's pretty cool, and he knows his shit. Like I instantly felt that, you were someone that I could learn from, trust in, and I suppose like Hannah said, I remember Hannah once saying, I just want Fish to hold me and tell me, of course you feel like that. It's okay. I just want Fish to give me a big cuddle and tell me it's all good, you know. And you got that energy, that kind of
Mm,
warm presence. And you are the
beautiful.
conflict resolver, the communication maestro, and the saver of doomed relationships. I might
Well,
say.
I'm also the guy who helps you separate well.
When that's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my first question is, like, you've been doing, I just read on your website before, you've been doing this since 2008.
Yeah.
Like, that's a long time.
Yeah.
And pre 2008, like, what led you to doing this kind of work, and who or what were the primary influences that supported you in doing what you now do?
Ooh, glad we've got an hour.
Yeah.
Um,
That's it.
so
That's the one question I got for you.
yeah, so in 2008, before I took the leap into taking my facilitation approach into the corporate market, which, by the way, what I was doing in this regard in 2008 and what I'm now doing are radically different. There's been a huge development over time working with humans. But prior to 2008, I was working with young people using drama as a tool for investigating reality, really.
Yeah. Wow. I didn't know that.
So yeah, so I would be given the most difficult young people in the most difficult schools in Western Australia, and they would sit with me thinking that I was a bit weird and a bit of a jerk and a bit like, what am I doing here? This is dumb. That's how it would start. And then I would I would introduce them to a bunch of drama games or processes which would ignite their ability to express their reality and tune into the reality of others in the group.
Mm.
It was a method that was closely related to forum theatre, which is the work of Augusto Boal. He's now on the drama curriculum, actually, at least in Western Australia, if not in the whole of Australia. But really, it was allowing students to skillfully navigate expressing their experiences and tuning into the experiences of others with the safety of fiction. So
Mm.
we would use fictional scenarios, create fictional scenarios, and then I would ask the young people to project onto the fictional scenario what you thought these players in the fictional scenario were experiencing. And so obviously what we project is our own experience onto the blank canvas of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really the foundation of when I started to see that humans needed safety to be fully expressed.
Mm.
And once that happened with young people, even the most difficult young people, even the young people who were constantly being expelled from school for hitting each other, when you created that kind of safety with young people, what actually emerged, the expression of their experience in the instance of safety was really profound and very moving. And so I just got to see humanness, and I got to witness what was required to create the safety for humanness to arise. And so that was very formative. I think I was very much still back then curious about what had people be safe to feel understood and expressed in their very real experience.
So what did you find was the requirements for them to be able to express themselves?
Well, I started to realize that there's a bunch of assumed unsafeties between us as human beings. There's the constant fear of judgment. There's the constant pressure to be right and not wrong. There's the need for our identities to be maintained, for us to be seen a certain way. And all of those, right and wrong, good, bad, all of those background assumptions that we're not even really conscious of impact our ability to show up open-heartedly to one another.
Yeah.
And once I started to create the foundations for that kind of safety, there were many of the kids that I worked with were boys, and many of the boys were Aboriginal boys. And once we created the safety for their experience to be validated and recognized, they immediately felt like they were being seen. And so all of the behavior that, by the way, was just trying to get seen, trying to have them seen as good, powerful, not weak, not naughty, not harmful, all of the behavior that would be escalating in their world started to just dissolve because they were actually just trying to get recognized. And so now when I train facilitators, one of the components that we look at in facilitation is what are the unconscious assumptions that we are constantly making whenever we're in relationship with other people, particularly people that we don't know, that undermine our sense of safety and compromise our ability to just show up and express ourselves and therefore be fulfilled in relationship.
So what did you do before that? Were you a teacher, or did you have social work skill? How did you get to that point?
Before that, so what led me into that is when I was 27 and my daughter was born, I made the decision that I was an environmental consultant. That's what I studied at uni. But I was consulting on projects that I was also being an activist against.
Yeah, right.
So I was like campaigning against certain proposals or wanting to, while also being employed to facilitate them. And so I was clearly in a really quite a deep ethical dilemma. And when my daughter was born, I thought to myself, if I'm going to do something that takes me away from being with my family, it better be something that is not ethically compromised. And some friends of mine were working to develop funding to create a theatre project in Denmark called Hypertheatre on the south coast of Western Australia near Albany. And I joined them, and we would start getting professional actors and directors down to work with us, to workshop ideas, and then they would go back to Perth, and then we would work with young people in the town, creating the kind of safety and expression that drama can create. And we would write our own shows and work with young people, and we'd put on improv theatre nights at the local cafes. And so I discovered through, I was not a trained actor. I was not particularly skilled in the realm of drama, but I was deeply passionate about it. And so that's how we would sort of work with the young people on the south coast. And then when I moved up to Perth, I got a job as the Barking Gecko Theatre Company workshop manager, so Barking Gecko is the theatre for young people organisation in Western Australia. And their work is pretty highly renowned. And I would coordinate all their workshop programs all over Western Australia. And my interest was in drama workshops that enabled young people to talk about difficult things like sexuality, like drugs and alcohol, like consent, like, a whole range of things. Topics that young people wanted to talk about, but often were shut down from talking about because they would do it unskillfully in a way that upset others.
What an amazing foundation.
So it's kind of been a really interesting thread. And then for a period of time, I worked for the state government for the Department of Culture and the Arts, and I was part of a team called Arts Edge, which would get artists in schools teaching other aspects of the curriculum through the 5 art forms. And so that was really profound, seeing where the creativity and self-expression that the arts supported could naturally enhance learning outcomes in things like maths and science and history, because of the engagement of the creative self.
Yeah.
Rather than just opening a book, turn to page 69 and summarize that paragraph that will be in your test.
Yeah.
Which for most of us is just like, fucking let me out of here, please.
Yeah. I ran for the hills as soon as I could legally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess the next logical question is that I can see, knowing what you do and experiencing what you do as a client of yours, I can see how that would form perfect foundations for what you now do.
Yeah.
But and obviously it would have grown, like you said, and changed and morphed. But like for other people that might not have experienced your work, how would you say that work affects or informs what you now do with people in conflict, relationship upset?
Yeah. Well, two of the strongest aspects really of my work are, the foundational to the approach that I take is that all I do actually is validate every human being in every moment for the experience that they're having. That's it.
I love it.
And that sounds it sounds kind of both simple, like the way I say it, it's as if it's really simple to achieve. And it also sounds a bit like ridiculous, because why would that be required? Because of course the experience that we're all having is valid. But turns out the mind doesn't naturally create the conditions whereby I get to have my own experience recognized and I get to recognize yours. The mind does anything but that, as you're increasingly aware,
Yeah.
So that first pillar, I guess, is that all human beings want to be recognized for the experience they're having right now in this moment. And when we can bring what I call loving awareness, non-judgmental awareness, validity, benign awareness, when we can bring that kind of loving awareness to the experience that we're having, me and you, in any moment, all conflict dissolves, actually. Because then we're just left tending to my experience and your experience. Even if we can't fix the circumstances that creating our experience, even if our experience is deeply painful, when it gets wrapped in loving awareness, it doesn't need to be any different.
That's huge.
Yeah, it is really huge. And, really, we're now speaking to the essence of meditation, is that the experience just gets to be wrapped in our presence.
Regardless of what it is.
Yeah. And the experience can move and shift and change, because experience rises and falls, rises and falls. So
that's so interesting too. Like the part of the experience is the thought, I shouldn't be experiencing this.
Yes.
And so rather than
that's what the
what
mind
comes
does.
to mind, we can either jump into the thought and enact it, or sit back and watch it and go, well, that's an interesting part of my experience.
Yes.
Look at my tendency to judge what I should or shouldn't feel.
Yeah.
And my tendency to judge what they should, shouldn't do, should, shouldn't say, should, shouldn't feel. Well, that's a tendency that I have.
That's right.
Can
The
I just be
mind,
here with me and with them?
yeah. The mind takes us on a merry dance.
Mm.
And the merry dance the mind takes us on is not actually, it doesn't facilitate open-heartedness and ease for even for ourselves, let alone between us and others. And actually, I've got a bit of a story to share about that. But before I do, the other sort of pillar that I wanted to share was the fact that, and it's, you know, it's kind of saying the same thing in a different way, that all behavior, like think of everything you've ever done or said in your life since you were born, and also everything you've not done or not said. All behavior arises from experience. It's just an expression of some experience that's happening in us. And that might sound kind of like, yeah, of course. But when we take that out into the world, and when we look at the behavior of others that we consider to be intolerable, feeling into the experience that might be happening in them underneath their intolerable behavior is actually the pathway to healing the planet. Because if we're not doing that, if we're not able to recognize that they are naturally expressing themselves through their behavior, expressing some very real experience they're having, if we can't do that, then we're just opposing the behavior, and opposing the behavior will amplify it. So let me give you an example. Can I share a little story that happened yesterday?
Yeah. And just before you do, I'll jump in quickly.
Yeah.
And say one of the best things I learned from you in that regard was just a tendency that I have, which is to, if Hannah's frustrated, upset, angry, was to feel like it's my fault and therefore get angry that she's angry.
Yeah.
And then she's like, I don't feel supported, seen, heard, understood. You're just being a dick. Slam the door. But rather than go, well, what's it like to just be here with both of our experience? Like it's life-changing stuff.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that, you know, your mind did that? All minds do that. As soon as someone we love expresses their upset towards us about what we did, which, by the way, we never wanted their upset. Have you realized that? Like you never woke up one morning and think, how do I really piss Hannah off?
Maybe once.
Well, even then it was your yearning for your pain to be recognized.
Yeah.
So, you know, they express their upset to us, and then suddenly the mind goes into this mode of going, whose fault is it?
Yeah.
It feels like she's saying it's my fault, but it's not my fault, because look how good I am. Look at how I didn't mean to hurt her. So that pain's actually her fault. The fault is her being too sensitive, or being unreasonable, or being ridiculous, or taking it the wrong way, or misinterpreting me, or overthinking it. So that's part of the mind's merry dance, is fault finding. But like if you look in nature, fault doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Like the rock falling off the cliff because the bird alighted from it doesn't go, damn you, bird. It's just rock falling and bird alighting, you know? And so, you know, how this works so closely relates to meditation from my perspective is that if we leave our experience up to, like if we let our life be shaped by thought, we're in trouble. because our thinking leads us on this merry dance of opposition, because the mind is just a this or that machine. It chooses a this or that, this or that, this or that, which is opposition being born from thought. So yeah, I like to think that both the practice of conscious communication and the practice of meditation are giving myself the skills to be led by my heart instead of trusting the dance the mind wants to lead me on.
So one more thing.
Yeah.
Can I interject with this, because I know this is going to be interesting, a really brief story, and then when you tell your story that you've been trying to get to for 5 minutes, I want to see if my story relates to your story.
Yeah, great.
So that's the mission, to feed my story into yours, because I just have a feeling it will.
Great.
So my story is when we were traveling around Australia, we were at, I can't even remember the name of the town, somewhere on the Murray River camping, and we went to a pub for an afternoon, and Nalu was in a playground, and he was so excited to see all these kids, because we'd been in the bush, remote, bathing in the river, cooking on the fire for a number of days. And so we're at this pub, afternoon, beer, he's playing with all the kids, and he was so excited to see all these kids. And he was the youngest there, but he just has this way before long, he weaseled his way into this big group of 8 or 10 kids, and he's running around. They're all following him. He's all of a sudden become the funny leader of the whole crew. But at some point, he had these kids following him, and he climbed up this kind of jungle gym playground thing, and there was a very narrow bridge that connected 2 parts of the park. And he was walking across the bridge, and this bigger kid, at this stage, Nalu would have been 2.5. And there was this bigger kid that was maybe 4 or 5, probably 5. And maybe he saw Nalu as oh, why has this guy got all the followers, or who's he think he is? You never know what's going on in a mind, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he stopped in front of Nalu on the bridge, and he was standing there like, and Nalu went to go around him, and he walked that way to block him. Nalu went to go around, and he walked that way to block him. And again, he was just standing there like, and Nalu stood, and he paused, and he didn't know I was watching, but he kind of paused and looked down and thought. And then he just wrapped his arms around him and gave him a big bear hug. And then the guy kind of went, oh, I got nothing. And then just walked off.
Yes. No threat.
No threat. There's nothing I can do. He's not responding to my, just love the shit out of him. And he just had nothing. And then Nalu went on, and all the kids kept following. And eventually the bully kid joined the crew and just played.
Isn't that incredible?
So funny to watch. I was like, what a legend.
Yeah. God, the lesson in that for all of humanity is radical.
Yeah.
Radically powerful.
So I don't know if that'll relate to your story, but let's see.
Well, yeah, I mean, it does really directly, but I just kind of want to point to the fact that, as a parent looking on, I might, and Nalu, if I'm you, right, and I'm looking on, it's very natural for us to reach some immediate conclusion that might sound like that bigger kid's just a bully.
Even I called him a bully,
Yeah.
That's what I'd already labeled him. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go. So the mind, there's immediately, like, not even a heartbeat, and the mind has already come to a conclusion based on our very natural self-centeredness. It's very natural for human beings to be deeply self-centered. I mean, think about it. I've been the main character since I was born in my life. Same for you. So we reached the conclusion that he's a bully, and also then Nalu goes to try and kind of like get around the obstacle, and the obstacle grows. Like when we try and push against opposition strengthens. And if Nalu had kind of like kept on trying to get around him and pushed him, I bet more strength would have been evoked in this older kid. So the more we're in opposition, the more opposition we evoke. And that's a critical aspect of conscious communication, because we don't realize that if we judge someone as a bully, we're evoking opposition in them. We're actually creating more strength of their opposition towards us by labeling them as a bully. Why? Because it's not their experience. No one on the planet thinks, yeah, I'm the bully. We are taking actions to meet needs.
Yeah.
So I love that you also started to feel into like, what's the experience that bigger kid, like, we're not condoning his behavior, right? We're not saying we're okay with him being like that with smaller kids or kids who've just joined the group. But what is the experience he's having behind there? Maybe he's feeling challenged. Maybe he's feeling confused that he doesn't have the same influence in the crowd. Maybe he's feeling jealous. Maybe he's feeling sad and left out. And once we start to tune into some experience that's alive in him, it starts to make sense of the behavior.
Yeah.
And the beauty about that is, rather than saying, you're a bully, get down off there, I'm sick of you being a bully, you can't play here anymore, that's a pretty legitimate standard response out there in the world towards what we might perceive as bullying. Nalu was actually able to go, this guy needs a hug. Like, that's profound, because actually when you realize that actually bringing love towards that guy's pain it's the only way through. It's the only fucking way through, right? It's the only way through. And most of us as adults will be so caught up in our analysis of the situation that we forget to recognize that behavior is arising from an experience, and the experience requires love. Not that we have to go around hugging bullies, but recognize that all shitty behavior arises from someone's feelings of shittiness, that it's crying out for loving awareness. Bad behavior is crying out for loving awareness. So my story, if you got anything to...
just in relation to that too, like to go back to what I said before, what I found, whether it's Hannah being there for me or me being there for Hannah these days, I'm learning if and when she was frustrated, angry, upset, unseen, if I can remember that, what's she experiencing? It's not about me. Like, let me just actually be here and say, I'm so sorry you feel that way, my love. Like, what do you need? It just, the difference in the response that elicits versus pushing the bully on the bridge and saying, don't be what you're being. It's just,
don't be what you're being.
And as the receiver, to receive that kind of love and warmth when you're in pain, wow, how disarming. So
exactly. So, because like, the term bully suggests that there's a badness in the person for behaving that way. But when we get curious about the experience they're having, it's entirely appropriate that they're behaving that way, actually, because look at what they're feeling. We're not saying we're okay with it, but we are starting to recognize it is aligned with the experience they're having. And if we weren't Nalu, if we didn't quite have the wisdom of actually just hugging this guy, right? The approach that we would take is to start to actually validate his experience, and we might speak to his pain and his yearning. So we might say to him, hey, I can see that you're feeling upset or angry or hurt or frustrated, and I'm right here. And I imagine that you might be wanting to feel more involvement or more leadership, or to be trusted by the group more, or to be followed more, that you're yearning for that sense of like, I'm the main guy, that joy and empowerment that comes from following. And of course you do, and I'm right here. And once we start to speak to the yearning and the pain or the longing and the suffering in a human being, they will naturally start to feel like their experience just got recognized. Or we can just hug them. My experience, my little story, I've got 100,000 to choose from, because I see conflict and opposition everywhere now. But it's the most recent. I'm in a little town on the east coast of Tassie, and I went into town yesterday to get some supplies. And there's an early referendum voting centre there. And there's a yes poster and a no poster. And outside the no poster is 3 or 4 guys, all kind of dressed in a certain way with a certain kind of look about them. And I noticed myself feeling really angry, immediately really angry at the notion that we as a country might be heading towards saying no to the opportunity to give our First Nations brothers and sisters a voice to Parliament, which so many of us would agree that that is an important step in our future. I felt so angry, and I noticed in my mind, I was thinking that these are the thoughts that were coming. Closed-hearted assholes, selfish, naive, misguided. So my mind had already thrown labels onto a group of men I've never met before. I haven't felt into the experience of. And you know, I've been doing this work for a long, long time, and still my mind wants to reach those conclusions and judgments. What I'm really saying behind those labels, if I can translate them into my experience, what I'm really saying is I long to feel hopeful about the future. And I long to feel like I'm part of something that is heading more and more towards compassion on the planet. I want to feel part of a society that values humanness over everything. That's my longing. And the experience, that the pain, the suffering that those words were so infused with were deep disappointment, heartbreak, sorrow, anger, confusion. Yeah. And so in plan A, if I allow my life to be shaped by my thoughts, then I continue to walk down the street thinking those things about those guys. And I come home with a frustration in my heart, and I go to bed feeling hopeless, and that there are some people on the world that, according to my view, don't want good things, and there are some people in the world that do want good things. And so I go to bed, I lay my head on the pillow at night with this separated notion of humanity, like there's an us and a them. And what I don't realize as I do that is that I did that. I created that. I just created the foundations of violence, of separateness between me and some other people that I've never even met or spoken to. I already decided that there was an us and a them, and I did that in my mind.
Yeah.
Plan B is notice that my mind wants to do that, and then remind myself that over there in the hearts of those wonderful human beings is a very deep yearning and a very deep pain that naturally, when expressed, equals voting no. It's just a natural expression of the experience that they're having. And I've got no idea of the experience that they're having.
Yeah.
And I don't need to, but I could get curious. I could go over to them and say, hey guys, I'm really just actually very curious about what the referendum means to you, what pain is alive in you, the idea of us heading towards a yes. What are you yearning for behind voting no? Let me into your world. And if I take that approach, or even if I walk down the street not taking that approach, but at least being aware that my mind wants to create division and my heart actually doesn't want to feel divisive, then I can go home and rest my head on the pillow that night and think, there are people whose experiences I don't yet understand. And they're all having yearning and pain. There's longing and pain in the hearts of every person. And if it kind of gets divided into like, how do I want to live, plan A or plan B? I'd much rather live plan B.
Isn't it ironic that we're frustrated at them because we yearn for peace and unity so deeply that we then do the opposite of peace and unity.
And we justify our violence towards them, yes.
Yeah. So we
have
a tendency to become the very thing we don't want.
Yeah. Just like the Christian Crusades that would put anyone to death who didn't follow the word of God. It's so ridiculously deeply ironic.
Yeah.
And we don't even notice we're just all caught up in our perspective, and we don't even realize that we're bringing violence, or maybe violence is a strong word, but we're bringing opposition. We're making other people wrong without even realizing it.
So what would you say is, we could call it the ego or the conflict mind, that we know why the mind creates conflict? It's always some form of defense mechanism so we can feel safe, easy, at home, secure, right? But conflict mind or ego, what is the hardest bit about your work that is also the most important bit for the conflict mind or ego?
Yeah. Well, so the yogic term abhinivesha, one of the 5 kleshas, can be translated as the fear of the death of my story of me. And so an interesting thing about the story of me, which is known as asmita in the kleshas, the story of me is actually quite well populated by the story that I have of you. So does that make sense? So every time I tell a story every time I decide something about someone else, it's actually me strengthening my story of me. So those guys, if I see them as closed-hearted, notice how I'm actually just unconsciously reassuring myself of my open-heartedness in comparison to them.
Yeah.
Or if they're fearful, that's because I consider my choices to be more courageous and less fearful than theirs. So always reassuring myself that I'm good. I'm essentially good. I'm essentially right. I'm essentially me. More and more me. The more I
It's
judge.
so funny. I teach, like, Nalo and I, whenever we're on the beach, we pick, if there's rubbish around, we pick it up, and he's so good now, he'll pick up a bit and put it in the bin. And it's so interesting to watch my tendency to be like, pick rubbish up. Why? Who left it? Some fucking idiot.
Yeah.
Versus it might have fallen out of someone's pocket, or I don't know the story. There's no story. It's just, this is our beautiful earth. There's a bit of rubbish there. Let's pick it up.
Yeah.
But even with that, like the wanting to create separation and to reinforce the fact that I'm good. So I totally understand what you mean.
Yeah.
It's like self-righteousness.
Those judgments, the judgment of someone being like an asshole for leaving their rubbish on the floor is actually pointing to part of your experience that needs recognizing, which is frustration, disappointment, feeling even violated. Like if you're in a beautiful place and someone's left rubbish, it violates your sense of the beauty of the place. It interrupts your sense of enjoyment. So, so that element of pain that comes alive in us when people do things, that needs to be recognized. It's just that, it's a difference between saying, what a jerk, someone littering, versus saying, look how disappointed I am that there's rubbish on the ground.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's difficult.
That's an incredible, I was just going to say incredible, like really, really good answer. The most difficult thing, that's the most important thing. The hardest thing to do is relinquish the story of I to put it into the fire. But it's also the most important thing when it comes to being able to empathize, understand, create compassion, open your heart, really see clearly the what isness of now.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads into the next question, I guess, which is that I was going to ask, and you spoke to a little bit already, which is, how do you see the most significant interplay of meditation and conscious communication? I guess that would be a big part of it.
Yeah, I think recognizing, so going back to that first point was like, the story doesn't need to be just, my story about those guys, I don't need to just turn away from it, right? Because that's just denying some very real experience that's wanting expression in me. But instead of turning away from it, I need to translate it. So my judgments of them were actually pointing to an experience that needs recognizing in me. It points to my frustration. Look how frustrated I am, fish. Look at how angry I am. Look at how much sorrow arises in me at the notion that if we head towards a no vote, what message does that send to my First Nations brothers and sisters after what they have been through? Like, and there's so much sorrow there. And so my judgment of them is actually pointing to how much sorrow I've got. And that's where I can bring loving awareness. That's what really needs to be tended to. My willingness to just like splash my analysis all over them is not helpful, but it's very helpful to tend to how much sorrow that speaks to in my heart. And you know, we out there in the world, we're absolutely obsessed by assuming ill intent for someone else. And we've got a whole lot of labels around it. You're controlling, you're a bully, you're a narcissist, you're gaslighting, you're stonewalling, all of these labels that say you have bad intention. And so the most tricky thing is to recognize that this mind, is doing the assuming that someone else's intentions must have been bad. That conclusion happened in here, and it's not true out there. Because if I get curious about what's in the heart of every human being behind the shittiest things they've done, I will always find that they were yearning to have their pain recognized or expressed. They were yearning to get out of their pain, or they were yearning to have their pain felt into by me so they felt so less alone with it. And that's the hardest thing in my work. I get messages from all over the world saying, how dare you dismiss my pain by asking me to feel into something other than ill intent? So it's very naturally threatening to people because it feels like I'm saying you're wrong about your pain.
Yeah.
But I'm actually saying you're right about your pain and you're wrong about what you made it mean about them.
Yeah.
They were yearning for something valid, and how they went about it created enormous pain for you, and both of those coexist. So at the moment, the intersection between meditation and conscious communication, at the moment, the most fascinating part for me is, you know, I've just been through a breakup, and I've been moving through a lot of grief, and I tend to ruminate in grief a lot. I tend to think, why am I so unlovable? Why didn't it work out? They should have this, they shouldn't have this, I should have this, I shouldn't have this. All of that rumination keeps me locked in upset. And instead, I've been practicing the active inquiry that, you know, you've been guiding us in, which really just says, what's alive in me right now? Let's elicit or evoke and be able to actually name, so that we can validate some emotional experience, some rising of sensation in me. And can I get a little more curious as to what that really is, to accept that it's here with me, to accept that it's right here with me, and to open to it, you know, like you so beautifully guide us in, like, what's the gift? What's the message? If emotions are our friend, if they are bringing attention to something that needs loving awareness, what is arising that I can bring loving awareness to? Being able to create space for the sensations of emotional experience in me at the moment is life-changing. Because if I can't do that, I will be locked in the pain, trying to resist it with thoughts about what it means about me or them. As soon as I can recognize that thinking, ruminating about my pain is distinct from feeling the sensations of it, as soon as I can make that difference, then I can actually spend time going, I will make the container of me big enough for all this sorrow to get loved. And in that process, something happens. There's some ease that comes in. There's a spaciousness, there's a presence that arrives, which I didn't have in my rumination. So active inquiry is powerful. And I think it's something that, if we're not creating space for our emotional experience, then we will naturally be lost in judgment of others. Naturally.
Yeah. It's amazing to realize how many people who have, there's often a number of reasons our mind might be spiraling, ruminating, or busy. One of them might just be a stimulated nervous system, and the mind becomes the shores upon which the waves moving through the nervous system crash. So there's a busyness in mind.
Yeah.
But if there's a constant ruminating, even when we're attempting to get calm, what I often guide people towards realizing, and so many people, we're so trained to be numb from the neck down, like we don't even feel our body.
Yeah.
And so what I often guide people, if your mind is busy in that sense, quite often the mind is just a screen, and there's images and thoughts just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah.
Ceaselessly. And it's the body, mind, subconscious mind, which is the body, attempt to protect us from the pain. So if we simply say, like, okay, if that's the screen, where's the projector? In other words, where do I feel? What's the subsequent feeling in my body behind the busyness? When I think like this, how does it feel? If we turn attention to feeling, direct experience, and out of analysis, all of a sudden we're at the projector, and you can't change what's being projected by trying to clean the screen.
Yeah.
Where's the source of what's happening here? Okay, now I can tend to it with a sense of loving care and interest. And sometimes I find, to turn towards the feeling behind the busyness of mind really helps people to understand why their mind is ceaselessly busy, rather than just resenting the busyness of mind. Why won't it stop? Why won't it stop?
Yeah. Look how protective it's trying to be.
Yeah. It's interesting that's kind of built into the system. Like even the old scientist, Dr. Candace Pert, called the brain an inhibitory cap, because it would kind of inhibit us from the bombardment of sensory overwhelm from stored energy and information in the body.
Yeah.
So it would give us the ability to feel into one thing at a time without overwhelm. Like it's part of the design in a way, even scientifically.
Yeah. I love that. And then, as our capacity to be with our emotions increases, we don't actually need that cap so much.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Like I know now that I've got the ability to actually allow huge emotions to be alive in my body. And that other day when I was ruminating, and I took time to just go, hang on a sec, this is rumination. What needs to be felt? And so I sat in meditation, and it just came to be this cold pressing. It was like frozen fingers all pressing in like this, but not like lovingly pressing, like really trying to kind of like force their way in underneath my collarbones. And then once I just said to myself, yes, cold pressing, cold pressing, cold pressing, and I just like welcomed it in, then it turned into hot closing in my throat. And then I was like, wow, hot closing, hot closing. Wow, look at how hot and look at how closing. And I just like actually got curious about it. And then a minute later, the cold pressing and hot closing just went. And then when I opened my eyes, I felt like I was free of the ruminations. And the ruminations are all about like, poor me, how much I've loved and how unlovable I appear. Like all of that rumination was I looked at it and kind of went, that's not true. And then I just continued on my walk.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, making that distinction, allowing, like I got tuned into the projector, not the screen. And then the projector just needed to spew out those sensations for a while and have them loved, and then the sensations stopped.
It's so fascinating too. And I love that as a meditation teacher talking about this, because we often talk about the fleeting nature of emotions, but people go, what we often miss is the subtext, which is in the absence of story and thought about it, in the absence of reaction to it.
Yes, because feelings are anything but fleeting when they're attached to story.
Exactly. And it's been, what even science says is that different emotions have a slightly different kind of experience. Like, for example, a heated anger is more short-lived than a slow sadness, but they are all fleeting nonetheless if they're just allowed to be, if there's nothing attached to them. So it's so interesting in terms of conscious communication and meditation. It's like we can train ourselves in practice to go, what am I experiencing? And this is a question that I've asked myself and I've been sharing with clients too, is what happens to that emotion? If I imagine I sit back behind my body and just watch, don't move a single muscle, but watch what happened. How does this emotion behave when I do nothing but just watch? And they move, they express, like you said, it came up to
Like
be
a crown.
released. And that happens with me if anger moves through my body, which typically I'm not a very angry person, but sometimes something just riles me up and I'll sit down, close my eyes and just watch anger. And it's so funny. It's such an intense inner experience that I want to move, I want to get up and I want to hit a pillow, or, but just to sit and watch the tornado, and then I get really hot and even sweat. And then I keep watching without moving, reacting, just loving, awareness, watching. And then at some point, like you said, it's just, and I'll just have a deep calm. And I'll be, wow, anger literally just passed. Now from this place, let me address what I was thinking about and considering in a decision I had to make, because I'm way more conscious and calm and actually in touch with my heart.
Now I'm responding.
Yeah.
Now I'm tending to what is from a place of open-heartedness. Now my ability to spread compassion and understanding on the planet is maximized. And back in our rumination, we were in reaction. And any action that we take, any remedy that we find from reaction will naturally go poorly. I mean, look at the current global outbreak of global violence. It's reaction against reaction against reaction against reaction against reaction. Underneath it all is overwhelming pain that wants to be recognized. But none of the pain's getting recognized. None of the pain is being wrapped in loving awareness, because it's just a react fest.
React fest.
And then all the commentary around it is also a react fest.
Sounds like some kind of rave.
Yeah. It totally is. It goes all night and all into the day.
Into the next lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think it's actually it's a really essential practice to witness and tend to our own emotional experience. Because if we can't, we're a reaction machine. And we will perpetuate pain on the planet, actually.
So speaking of that,
be.
I've got 2 more questions for you.
Yeah.
First one is, if what you taught was taught in every school across, let's just say Australia for now, in primary school, what would the world look like in 15 years, or Australia look like, for example? Do you think? How would it differ?
Well, if I take it into the household, right? All around Australia, there would be kitchens and bedrooms and family rooms in which people are expressing their unmet needs skillfully in a way that leaves their other person feeling deeply honored and seen. And so that would mean that relationships that we chose to continue with were deeply fulfilling and mutual. What it would also look like is, in those kitchens and bedrooms and lounge rooms, compassionate conversations were taking place whereby we started to reach the conclusion that perhaps we couldn't continue on in this form of relationship while being deeply compassionate to one another. that we had to change the form of the relationship in order to still stand in a place of compassion. So ongoing relationships would be having unmet needs skillfully met, no resentment harbored, no blame for unmet needs not being met. And there will be a whole lot of skillful separations happening where it's like, my heart and your heart, we're both yearning for wonderful things. We're both suffering. And we haven't yet been able to find a way that I go about expressing my yearning that doesn't leave you feeling upset, or you go about expressing your yearning that doesn't leave me feeling upset. So maybe we actually need to move away from the nature of the relationship that we thought we could do in order for us both to feel really deeply fulfilled and honored by one another. And I don't think we do separation very skillfully. I think we do madly clinging onto relationship and blaming each other for our upset in it. I think we do that really well. Yeah. So I would say in the household, it would be people feeling deeper fulfillment and open-heartedness, whether that be in relationship or in separation.
And how do you think that will manifest in a political, larger, even business or political sense?
It's interesting to think as it plays out in politics, because I've grown up just like you have in an adversarial political system where there's a government and an opposition. And just about every political interview you'll hear, it's about bringing the other side down. So, and if every politician had since primary school been trained in non-oppositional communication, you wouldn't have interviews about what the other party was doing wrong or their ill intent. None of that would exist. And I even question whether you would need to have a bipartisan approach at all.
Yeah.
You might just have a council of elders sitting around discussing things and working out and leaving everyone feeling deeply understood and working out the next step that we might try for the benefit of everyone. It wouldn't look like politics.
It's hard to even imagine.
It's hard to imagine. But, you know, indigenous cultures did it for years, thousands, tens of thousands of years, just deeply consultative processes to restore what needed to be restored.
With no rush to come to a conclusion.
No. And even in the process of consultation, leaving everyone feeling recognized, even if an outcome couldn't be found.
Yeah.
And it would also look like incarceration being a thing of the past, because incarceration doesn't heal the individual. Incarceration is just about the idea of, I want you to suffer a lack of liberties so you get the suffering you created for me. That's not at the heart of compassionate practice. The heart of compassionate practice says, I want the perpetrator to be healed, just like I want the victim to be healed. And incarceration doesn't do it. So we'd need to get much more plugged into how might we rehabilitate, how might we wrap love around someone who might be a perpetrator to the point where their experience gets so recognized that their actions, their illegal actions cease. Yeah. And that's a radically different approach to the one that we've got now, which is very punitive.
And so maybe my next question maybe there'll be no further addition because you kind of just said it, but maybe there will be. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want my legacy to be, I want it to be global. And I want it to be a greater connection to God, what a great question. I really want us all to be able to see our humanness. Because if I can see the things that I've done that came from a loving place that caused impact on others that I never would have hoped for. If I can recognize that in every moment, and then I can recognize that other people are out there in the world doing their best, going about expressing some intention, and it's creating very real pain for me or others. If I can see that deeper truth of the heart, then I will have an increasing sense of open-heartedness towards all beings, even those who do things that have deeply upset me or that I won't tolerate. So I think to leave behind communities of people radiating radically compassionate approaches. Yeah.
Wow.
This book that I'm writing at the moment, I had a chat to someone about, she was asking me questions about like, why are you writing it? And what are your ideas around what publisher and stuff? And I said, really, I just want this to be the lowest cost option and the deepest understanding of how to stand in a place of love with yourself and all beings. And I want every person to read it because I want freedom for all beings, even in the midst of our great pain.
Yeah. And I can really feel that with the essence of your work, and the way it comes through when I've chatted with you, but even through Instagram, through everything, I can see your commitment.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yeah. Thank
you.
And
I also recognize that obviously through years of meditation and the like, I have some self-awareness, but when we did some work together last year, even in my marriage, I could still see that the awareness, along with the awareness, I needed some skills and strategies to support what I could see.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel like's been hugely missing in the conversations around compassionate conversation and even boundaries and all this pop culture stuff that we know is relevant, but what's the actual strategy to leave both people when in conflict feeling loved?
Yes.
Whether it's family or spouse or and that's been so revolutionary. And the reason I wanted to chat just so everyone can get a sense of you and that, and then go on further to find you, eventually read your book when it's done, work with you in whatever way they can, at least follow you on Instagram. Because I love it and I believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks, man. You're right. Without actual practical skills in the kitchen at 10 minutes to when the kids are meant to go to school, and you've suddenly your partner's just like taken that tone of voice with you, without the skills to employ in that moment, the idea of actually growing mutual open-heartedness, that's fantasy, right? That's like, yeah, great. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But this person's being a bit of a dick right now, so it's impossible. But we have to have practical skills to reach for. And otherwise it's just like, this work of mine just lands as like fairy floss unicorn philosophy, like wallpapering over tracks. Let's just be okay with everything. Let's just realize we're all humans, guys. Like it's just, it lands as really banal, actually, until you get into the practical skills. And then you're like, wow, I turned a moment of conflict into a moment of open-heartedness for the first time yesterday. Yes, I can do it today.
And you know what I have to say too? I feel like it's extra hard for me, because in the best possible way, because Hannah's aware of your work, has listened to podcasts, follows you on Instagram, and I would, when I was doing work with you, I'd go and tell her, we talked about this is the strategy, this is how we do it. And so if I'm to like use a fishism and say, I can see that in my attempt to do this, I've left you, she'd be like, don't you, I'm going to use fishes stuff on me, and so I have to be like so creative to find a way to communicate when she has no idea that I'm using your skills.
You actually have to stand more in the authenticity of it. She's asking you to be more authentic with it.
She is.
She's asking you to let go of the tool and be with her.
Yeah.
And I do have a sense of that, MK, because I tell you what, in my personal relationships, I get called out on that all the time.
That would be so funny.
And I'm like, "No." And it's so frustrating because I know the strategy that I'm using will work, but they are resistant to having a strategy used. So
Yeah,
it's
wow.
just, once again, it's an invitation to go, let go of the tools, stand in the place the tools invite me to stand,
Mm,
which is, I'm right here for you and for me.
yeah, there you go. That's it.
So it's, yeah, I feel your pain, and what an invitation it is for both of us to let go of the approach and just be open.
Love it.
Yeah.
So, where anything else you want to add, or any specific places people can find you, catch up with you, learn more?
You guys can find me on Instagram, James_fish_Gill. Come up as Heart Coach. On the web, leadbyheart.com. And there you'll find podcast interviews of mine and details about group coaching programs and one-to-one coaching programs and future retreats and workshops. Yeah, and feel free to reach out directly if you've got questions or concerns. A lot of people do, and I actually just try and give as much value to human beings as I possibly can, even people I've never met before or who will never be clients of mine. So when I have attention to give, I like to give it.
Mm. And I know you're doing a facilitator training program next year as well, because a lot of our followers or friends are people that are in the field of teaching meditation yoga. And so that could be something of interest. Is that already filled up, or you got some spaces left for that?
So I ran my first facilitator training it finished earlier on this year, and that was the first cohort of 10 people. And now I've got 2 more cohorts of 10. One starts on November 22nd and one starts in January. They are for US and UK time zones, and there are some spaces left. And really that is how to take the tools of compassionate communication, how to take those and guide the people, clients, family members, guide people through the application of these tools so people in your community can start having those wins, not just you, but all the people you want to experience love in every moment it goes missing. They can take the tools and start practicing in the relationships that matter most to them. And that program for me is just like, it's like absolute bliss, those conversations, because I'm surrounded by a cohort of people who have the deepest commitment to this work. And it's just like, yes, let's dive in. It's like, it feels like Christmas to me when I have one of those calls, because everyone's really tuned in, practicing madly in their life, reporting on all the wins that they're having and desperate to spread it on the planet. So it's deeply fulfilling. Yeah.
Love it. Amazing. Right, I reckon that's a good point to wrap it up.
Beautiful. So good to chat with you.
You too. Thanks for being here, my friend. Oh, I just did an in-burp. Did you hear that?
An in-burp?
I'm glad it didn't come. Well, it's like it didn't come out my mouth. I was like half hunger, half digestion. So I'm glad it didn't come through the microphone because it was completely involuntary.
I love that. An in-burp.
All right, let's finish on an in-burp.
Thanks, MK.